economy like India, where energy imports remain a key vulnerability factor, the questions are immediate and pressing. Could oil prices head even higher? Will geopolitical uncertainty keep global markets on the edge? And what does this mean for inflation, interest rates, and investor sentiment? Joining us today to decode this development, we have Ashutosh Karnatak. He's the former director of Gas Authority of India at GAIL. Then we have Joeita Basu, editor of the Sunday Guardian, and we have Pramit Pal Chaudhary of the Eurasia Group. Thank you so much for joining us today on India Tonight. Let's begin this conversation with you, Mr. Chaudhary. How long till the conflict will end, and how much should we believe on the fresh threats which Trump has issued on Iran today after calm for like just a couple of weeks?
So we've seen this plot before. We've seen Trump issuing blood-curdling threats. We've seen the two sides exchange kinetic action against each other. We've seen ships be hit in the Hormuz. And then suddenly Trump says, oh, actually, everything's all right, and I'm going to go back and work out a deal with the Iranians. I think that despite concerns in the markets, this is more or less a return to that story. Why? Because we have both sides have actually been reasonably restrained. As Trump himself said, we're not hitting top level. America's not hitting top level targets. Iran hit just 3 ships, was careful to hit a few American bases, but didn't go beyond to hit oil and gas infrastructure in Saudi Arabia or UAE. And I think we'll see this peter out after a while. Second, the original memorandum of understanding that was signed between the two governments was an unusual diplomatic document because it had virtually no details. It was a very vaguely worded language, very open to interpretation, which is exactly what diplomats would normally not allow. But in this case, given the nature of how Trump functions, he didn't allow that negotiation to take place. So there was always going to be a problem about when the sides differed about the language, about the timing of the MOU, that they were going to go back and start fighting with each other again. If you want to put it this way, we are negotiating on the fly after the MOU. The MOU is the beginning of the end, I would argue, rather than the end of the conflict. And we will negotiate by a combination of conversations as well as fighting. Finally, the key driver, however, for the original MOU, the American unwillingness to use its military power to reestablish its dominance of the Persian Gulf, an Iranian government that sees itself in a very good position. The results of this conflict have actually been quite good for it. Still stand. Those are not going. That hasn't really changed. But I think, let's say from the Iranian perspective, they're a little unhappy that, for example, the fighting in South Lebanon continues, that they have been able to move 58 million barrels of oil out of the Hormuz Straits, but that there's no buyers for it because the Americans are still not lifted sanctions. So at the end of it, the Iranians are saying, well, we didn't quite get the deal that we expected. And that's partly because of the vagueness of the MOU.
Joeita Basu, over to you. Your reaction on, what specific military thresholds would actually trigger a direct conflict back again in the region, according to you?
Well, I think it is not just upon Mr. Trump to decide whether the U.S. will be going to war again. The intensity of what we saw initially. First of all, there we are looking at the allies over there, particularly the Gulf countries. They're extremely unhappy with the restarting of the war. And that is what Iran is going to do, whatever missiles it has left with. The minute the missiles, whatever we have seen, I would say, if I can use the word posturing, perhaps it is more posturing than actual military action. And the thing is, and if US escalates any further, Iran is going to hit out at the Gulf countries, UAE, and and if Trump is talking about taking out the
Right. Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, but the posturing is in fact costing the world quite a bit because, we have seen a jump in, of course, the crude oil prices. And, we saw the markets react very sharply back home as well. Over to you quickly, Mr. Karnatak. I know that towards the end of March, the oil prices had hit a really big high. But how long can the oil market sustain this uncertainty in the region?
See, this is a time when, because oil prices are very sensitive to the Strait of Hormuz. What indication it has given by the Mr. Trump statement that Hormuz is still a critical factor, and it has a direct impact on the oil price. So that's why today we have seen that it has gone to $78. So this is going to happen till the time this issue is not resolved properly, and it is called a zone of possible agreement. Until the zone of possible agreement between the Iran and US is established, this uncertainty we are going to see maybe for a longer time, maybe 2-3 more months.
Right. Now we also have Mr. Arnab Das. He's a global market strategist who is joining us on ET Now for this debate on India Tonight. Arnab, thank you so much for joining us today on India Tonight. And we have seen sharp reaction after Trump's comments on how, the conversations are now off. The negotiations can go on the sidelines. But, he may strike Iran soon. And the markets have reacted sharply to that. Your reaction to that and, what will we see in the days to come?
Well, thanks for having me. Yes, look, I think, the underlying issue here is that the ceasefire has been fragile all along. Iran, it seems to me, clearly, wants to demonstrate that it has control over the Strait of Hormuz. Freedom of navigation is no longer there. It's a choke point, and Iran is making that point. And of course, the U.S. And I would suggest most of the rest of the world would be, would want to try to restore freedom of navigation. And the point that was just made that Iran can retaliate and has demonstrated capacity several times in this conflict and even earlier, that it can hit out at, quote unquote, U.S. allies in the Gulf Cooperation Council and in the region, that is very much clearly still the case, right? So I think what we can take away from this is that the situation is clearly far from stabilized, let alone resolved. And that, given the 40 or 50 years that the U.S. has been unable to solve the conundrum in Iran, this conflict has crystallized perhaps why, right? Iran has a lot of levers and bargaining chips and just leverage generally to use, and it is not shy of using that. So I think that is, a challenge for the U.S. It's a challenge for the world. It's a challenge, as has been said, for the commodity market, financial markets generally. So, I think where are we going from here? I think it's hard to tell, but I suppose, the president, despite his inimitable style, is going to be somewhat constrained because he doesn't want the price of oil to go through the roof, the price of gasoline in the United States during the summer driving season, ahead of the midterms, right? So I think I expect we'll see more of this posturing, as it's been called, more of this conflictual behavior, but it probably won't be allowed to get out of hand because of the constraints the midterms impose.
Right. Back to you, Joyita ma'am, since you also mentioned the posturing of it during, our conversation before this. So the timing and the location of it is happening, whatever Trump said, it has happened in Ankara during the NATO summit. Help us understand now that, this announcement in Ankara around the NATO summit, how particularly, will it impact the NATO unity, going forward?
If you're looking at the NATO unity, whatever is happening in Iran, all the countries, NATO countries, they are talking in terms of there has to be peace. You see, when I'm talking about posturing, you have to understand one thing, that when Trump is talking about taking over Kharg Island, the only way he can do it is by boots on the ground, and he doesn't have that kind of troops in that region. How does it? So whatever he's talking about, and as the previous panelist also mentioned, he is not enough. The midterms are coming up. So you see, I mean, maybe he will be shooting a bit here and there and all, but he cannot afford to go into a full-fledged war. And apart from that, there are restraints on him and constraints on him imposed by US Congress. There are problems in that side as well. So when you are looking at in this context, the thing is, you see, what is interesting is this is realignment with Turkey. Now, Turkey was they had been, but at the same time, we have been seeing, Mr. Trump being very, very positive towards Erdogan for some reason. And maybe it has a lot to do with perhaps he's hoping in terms of Erdogan exercising some influence that he has over in that region to restrain maybe the Hezbollah, that side, because there is some talk about that, some kind of funding and stuff that is coming in from that area. So, but let us see how it goes. I mean, if you're talking about NATO allies...
At this time, 80 Iranian positions have been hit so far. This announcement happened during, the NATO summit in Ankara. Now, how does this impact? Let's go over to you, Mr. Chaudhry. How does this impact Turkey's delicate diplomatic position also with Iran?
Well, I don't think Turkey need to worry. I mean, Turkey doesn't need to worry too much about this per se. This is not a NATO action. I think for Turkey, as a lot of other Middle Eastern powers, they're looking already at a post-American Persian Gulf, if you wish, that over the medium term, you will see American power dwindle, or American even interest in the Gulf dwindle. Partly because North America is now the oil and gas hub of the world. America produces almost as much oil as Russia and Saudi Arabia put together right now.
Sorry to bother you. Sorry to interrupt at this point in time, but I would also like to add that it was just yesterday that Trump declared Turkey as a friend, and he also said that when he went against Iran, went to war in Iran, in West Asia, the other NATO allies, taking specifically a dig at France and UK, he said that they didn't back US. But, he considered Turkey as a friend. So I would also like your reaction on that.
Well, Turkey definitely didn't help the United States in any military fashion either. Nobody joined the United States. It was a war that America went into largely, if there was any country that had an influence on it, was Israel. No NATO member was involved. Yes, American bombers from Incirlik base in Turkey may have been used, but that would be passive support at best. Turkey didn't criticize it, but nor did any other NATO member, or very few of them. So Turkey I don't think Turkey was a major part or player. What I think Trump was very happy about with Turkey right now is, one, that Turkey is actually buying American weapons, signing a very large deal with F-35s at a time when many other NATO members, especially other European members, are now rejecting American weapons because they don't trust the United States anymore. But I think for any long-term Middle Eastern policy, you're looking at three centers of power: Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. With countries like Turkey, maybe in Egypt, definitely in Israel, acting as sort of a second ring of powers that has influence on the balance of power that will emerge regionally. So Turkey will become a much more important country. So will, incidentally, India. But present, while it's trying to stay neutral, is getting closer to Saudi Arabia on that front. But it doesn't really want to get involved between those three countries. So Turkey is playing a sensible game, very similar to what India or even is playing, which is stay on the fringes and carefully watch what to see happens at the local level. But that's a more medium long-term game.
Right. Well, on this note, it is time for us to slip into a very short break. Just stay with us, all of you. We'll be right back after this very short break on India Tonight. Well, welcome back. You're watching India Tonight, and we are discussing Trump's fresh threats on Iran and its impact on the markets, on the economies around the world, what will happen in the West Asia in the coming weeks. And we're joined in by a stellar panel of experts today on the show. And quickly over to you, Mr. Karnatak, since you are an oil expert. Help us understand now. Trump has said that there will be a fresh blockade issued in the Strait of Hormuz. How will it impact the oil markets going forward if it actually happens?
See, Hormuz controls around 20% of the global supply. So it means if it happens, again, we are landing to the same problem which we have landed earlier. So it has got an impact on the total global supply, not only to India, throughout the world. So it is not a very welcome decision if it happens.
Help us understand how long can global supply chains sustain, if the blockade happens?
See, now, in fact, now almost all the countries, they have started going for the alternate routes, like India has done, and diversified crude sourcing, it has started, and some oil has been stored also. And other countries also, they are now using their storage, and storage filling would have started, which has earlier they are getting emptied. So now at least for 2-3 months, what I feel that people can sustain, the countries can sustain this turmoil. But I feel that after some time, it is a temporary. It's a reaction of Donald Trump out of their frustration. It's a reactive action on getting delayed and fear of failure in the negotiation. So it may be after a week, some new statement will come and it will improve upon. So we have to be watchful in this case, not to react much, but we need to understand how we should act in this situation. But it is not such a precarious situation that there will be shortage of oil and price will increase. It is not like that. It will hover around 76 to 80, 80 to 85, something like that, and coming down, going up. A transition or rather a sensitive position have emerged. So we have to be very watchful.
Right. Over to you, Mr. Das. Help us understand what specific hedging strategies or maybe some structured products are, these institutional asset managers using to, protect their portfolios, because volatility has become a new normal since the start of 2026.
I think that's absolutely right. I suppose some people are hedged as to their direct oil exposure, and some people are hoping and sort of managing the portfolio on the basis that it's diversified and therefore resilient to all these shocks. Of course, the original threat here is that if you have a big disruption in the supply of oil, that not only drives up the price, but makes it very difficult to get oil, you might face a bit of a kind of stagflation, or at least stagflation light kind of shock, where growth and growth assets such as equities are hit at the same time that bonds are hit, because you're going to have inflation. Right? So you get a growth hit and an inflation hit, and so much of your portfolio goes down all at once. I think, the good news here, if we can call it that, is that the shock has been both in the earlier parts of the war and possibly in this part of the war, if the view that was just expressed is correct, and I sort of share that, there'll be some impact on the price, but not a huge amount of impact on the oil price. Then it's going to be a relatively modest and even if somewhat sustained shock, right? And part of this is because China has reduced demand for oil, and part of it is because there's been a lot of intervention in the oil market through releases from various kinds of strategic petroleum reserves, and plus corporate reserves have been run down. So the impact has been, sort of attenuated, right, compared to what you might have expected and what many people feared when the war first began. How long this can be sustained, of course, is anyone's guess. But I suspect that, like I said before, there are constraints on the U.S. side. There are also constraints, I think it has to be said, on the Iranian side, right? They also want to be able to ship the oil. They and the rest of the Gulf have a kind of a problem where the Gulf or the Strait have been sort of laden with many vessels that are floating storage now that have not been making it out into the global oil market that have started to move, right? And so I think all parties will eventually want to keep that going, and so probably we'll have some de-escalation, but it won't be the end of the story. So I think I think you're right. The volatility is sort of here to stay because the uncertainty is here, and let's say that this calms down for some time during much of the rest of the summer. What about after the midterms? None of the problems on any side here have really been solved. And I think, a can of worms has been opened, if I can put it this way, where, like I say, the Strait has become a choke point. And so dealing with this problem will continue to be front and center one way or another, dealing with the problem from Iran's point of view, dealing with the problem from the Gulf's point of view, from Israel's point of view, from the point of view of the U.S., and from the point of view of oil importers around the world, including India. So the story is not going to be over, I don't think, anytime soon. So I think what's going to happen is that investors around the world are going to prepare for continued volatility and maybe try to keep things a bit closer to home. I think that'll be constrained by the desire and the need to continue to keep an eye on the AI. Tech sector generally, semiconductors and so forth, under some pressure now, of course. But there'll also be the hope that this industrial revolution will continue. So that may contain some of the downside in the equity market.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today on ET Now. And thanks a lot for your inputs. Thanks, Mr. Karnatak, Joyita Basu, Pramit Pal Chaudhary, and of course, Arnab Das on sharing your inputs on, the recent threats by Donald Trump in Ankara and the fate of the West Asia crisis going forward, its impact on India, and of course, the global oil markets. Thanks again for joining us. Well, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of India Tonight. Goodbye from me, Shubhani Gharat, and the entire team of ET Now.